There is a moment that happens on every major military base in the world, on every forward operating location, on every desert range and jungle training ground, where the exercise director looks out over his team, checks the last safety report, picks up the radio, and gives the order that sends a chill through every soldier within earshot. The range is hot, live fire is authorized. Go. And in that instant, everything changes. This is no longer a classroom. This is no longer a simulation. The rounds in those weapons are real. The explosions are real. The danger is real. And the men and women moving through that training environment are operating under conditions that would be unrecognizable to anyone who has never served a single day in uniform. Today we are going inside the most dangerous live-fire training exercises the United States military runs on a regular basis. Not the sanitized version, not the public affairs photo shoot version. We are talking about the actual mechanics, the risks, the preparation, the failures, and the extraordinary human beings who put their lives on the line before they ever set foot in a real combat zone. Because here is what most people never stop to think about. The training itself kills people. Not often, not carelessly, but it happens. And the military accepts that reality because the alternative, sending undertrained soldiers into actual combat, kills far more. If you respect the men and women who wear this country's uniform, type "ready" in the comments right now. And if you are new here, subscribe before you keep watching. You are not going to want to miss a single second of what comes next. Let's start at the very beginning, because before you can understand what makes live fire training so uniquely dangerous, you need to understand what it actually is, and why the military decided a long time ago that there is simply no substitute for it. For most of human history, armies trained with wooden swords, with blunt spears, with formations practiced on open fields far from any actual battlefield. The theory was simple. You teach a soldier the movements, the tactics, the commands. You drill them until the actions become reflexive, and then you send them to war and hope that what they learned transfers to the chaos of actual combat. For a long time, that was the best anyone could do. But modern warfare broke that model completely. When you add automatic weapons, precision explosives, artillery, close air support, armored vehicles, and the ability to move at speeds and distances that previous generations of soldiers could not have imagined, the gap between training and reality becomes lethal. Soldiers who have never heard a live round fired near them, who have never felt the concussive force of an explosion within 100 meters, who have never moved through an environment where the margin for error is measured in inches rather than feet, those soldiers freeze. They hesitate. They make decisions that cost lives. The research is not ambiguous about this. Units that conduct rigorous live-fire training before deployment perform better under contact. They have faster reaction times. They communicate more clearly. They make better decisions under stress. They survive at higher rates. The training is dangerous. But combat without that training is more dangerous. And that is the equation the military has built its entire training philosophy around. So what does live-fire training actually look like at the highest, most demanding level? To understand that, we need to go to one of the most famous training locations on Earth. We need to go to the National Training Center. The National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, sits in the middle of the Mojave Desert. It covers roughly 1,000 square miles of terrain. 1,000 square miles. That is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. The landscape is a combination of open desert, rocky ridgelines, dry riverbeds, and elevated terrain that looks like nothing so much as parts of the Middle East, which is exactly why it was chosen and exactly why it has been used to prepare American soldiers for combat since 1981. Every year, brigade combat teams from across the Army rotate through the National Training Center for what the military calls an NTC rotation. These rotations run roughly 30 days. They are not gentle. They are not forgiving. They are designed from the very first day to push a unit past what it believes its limits are, identify every weakness in its leadership, its logistics, its tactics, and its communication, and then do it again before the rotation ends. The opposing force at the National Training Center is legendary. It is a permanent unit, soldiers who live and work at Fort Irwin, and whose entire professional mission is to defeat every visiting unit as convincingly and as completely as possible. These soldiers know that terrain the way most people know their own neighborhood. They have fought mock battles across those 1,000 square miles hundreds of times. They have refined their tactics, their deception, their communication, and their ability to exploit every mistake a visiting unit makes. Commanders who arrive at the NTC overconfident leave humbled. That is not a coincidence. That is the design. But here is where the live fire dimension enters the equation, and where the danger level shifts into a completely different category. Scattered throughout the NTC rotation are live fire exercises. Not simulated, not laser tag, not blank rounds. Actual live ammunition, fired by actual soldiers, at actual targets, in conditions that are designed to replicate the confusion and speed and violence of a real firefight as closely as possible without deliberately killing the trainees. The difference between those last two words is where every safety officer, every range control NCO, and every commander on that range lives and breathes for the entire duration of the exercise. The gap between as closely as possible and deliberately is the distance that years of planning, months of rehearsal, thousands of safety checks, and the constant vigilance of experienced range safety officers is designed to maintain. When that gap collapses, even briefly, people die. It has happened. It will happen again. And the military trains relentlessly to make those moments as rare as humanly possible. So let's walk through an actual live fire exercise, step by step, from the planning stage to the execution, because the preparation alone is extraordinary. Planning for a major combined arms live fire exercise begins months before the exercise itself. This is not an exaggeration. Senior planners at the National Training Center, along with the leadership of the unit rotating through, begin coordinating the specifics of a major live fire event as far as 8 to 12 weeks before the first round is ever fired. They determine the objectives. They design the target array, meaning the specific locations and types of targets that will represent enemy forces. They identify the exact routes that assault elements will take through the range. They calculate the maximum ranges and firing angles of every weapon system that will be used. They establish the fire support coordination measures, which are the invisible lines and boundaries on the map that dictate when and where supporting fires can and cannot be employed. That last point deserves a moment. In a combined arms live fire exercise, you are not just dealing with individual soldiers firing rifles. You are dealing with tanks firing 120mm main gun rounds. You are dealing with Bradley fighting vehicles firing 25mm cannon rounds. You are dealing with artillery firing from positions miles away from the forward elements. You are dealing with attack helicopters firing rockets and cannon. In some cases, you are dealing with close air support from fixed-wing aircraft dropping live ordnance. Every single one of those weapon systems is operating simultaneously, in close proximity, in a dynamic environment where friendly soldiers are moving constantly. The way the military manages all of this is through an intricate system of coordination measures. Phase lines are drawn on the map. No system fires beyond a certain phase line until friendly forces have passed behind it and are confirmed clear. Fire support coordination lines establish boundaries between where indirect fire can be used freely and where it requires positive coordination. No fire areas protect specific terrain features where friendly forces might be located. Restricted fire areas limit what weapons can be used in specific sectors. The entire range is divided into lanes, and each lane has a specific unit moving through it, with specific weapons firing in specific directions at specific times. The plan for a large combined arms live fire exercise can be hundreds of pages long. There are primary plans and alternate plans and contingency plans for what happens if weather interrupts operations, if a vehicle breaks down in a danger zone, if communications fail at a critical moment, if a soldier is observed in a location where fire is about to be delivered. Every scenario that experienced planners have ever seen go wrong gets a written answer before the exercise begins. And then, after all of that planning, before the first unit steps onto the live fire range, they rehearse. Not once, multiple times. The rehearsal for a major live fire exercise is itself an extraordinary event. Units walk through the entire battle sequence on a terrain model, which is a large-scale physical representation of the actual terrain where the exercise will take place. Leaders stand around that terrain model and literally walk their avatars through every phase of the operation. The commander of each element calls out exactly what his or her unit will do at each phase of the battle, exactly what weapons will be employed, exactly where friendly forces will be located when supporting fires impact. Every participant in the exercise rehearses their role in sequence until the entire choreography is clear to everyone involved. There is a reason the military uses the word choreography to describe this, because in many ways that is exactly what a major live fire exercise is. It is a dance between dozens of weapon systems, hundreds of individual soldiers, multiple supporting units, and a range control element that is monitoring everything from elevated observation posts with the authority to shut the entire exercise down at any moment if something does not look right. But here is the paradox that sits at the heart of every live fire exercise, and it is the thing that makes this kind of training genuinely dangerous in a way that no amount of planning can fully eliminate. The entire point of the training is to introduce chaos. If the soldiers know exactly where every threat is, exactly when every event will happen, exactly what they will be required to do at each moment, they are not learning to fight. They are learning to execute a script, and scripts do not work in combat. So the range designers intentionally build uncertainty into the exercise. Targets appear at unexpected times. Communications fail at critical moments. Simulated casualties force leaders to adapt their plans on the fly. Vehicle breakdowns create gaps in the formation that units have to fill without losing momentum. The enemy positions are designed to create genuine tactical problems that require creative solutions rather than rote execution of a memorized plan. All of that chaos, all of that uncertainty, all of that deliberate stress is being introduced into an environment where real weapons are firing live ammunition. And that combination, the unpredictability that is necessary for good training, and the absolute requirement that every round fired goes exactly where it is supposed to go, is the fundamental tension that live fire training never completely resolves. It manages it. It mitigates it. It drives the risk down as far as human ingenuity and institutional experience can push it. But it never eliminates it entirely. The people who manage that tension have a specific title and a specific role that most civilians have never heard of. They are called range safety officers, and on a major live fire exercise, they are the most important people on that range who are not carrying a weapon. A range safety officer on a large combined arms live fire exercise is typically an experienced senior non-commissioned officer or officer who has been specifically trained and certified in range safety procedures. On a battalion level or brigade level live fire exercise, there are multiple range safety officers, each assigned to specific elements within the exercise. Their job is to observe the exercise in real time, monitor where friendly forces are located, verify that fires are being delivered within the authorized areas, and be prepared at any moment to call a ceasefire. The authority of the range safety officer on a live fire range is absolute. It supersedes the authority of the commander whose unit is training. If the range safety officer sees something that he or she believes presents an imminent danger to personnel, that individual picks up the radio and says, "Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire," and every weapon on that range goes cold immediately. No debate, no discussion, no question. The range goes cold, and it stays cold until the situation is assessed, and the safety officer determines that it is safe to continue. That authority is not theoretical. It gets exercised. Ranges get shut down in the middle of exercises because a vehicle strayed outside its designated lane, because a target engagement was at an angle that put it closer to a friendly position than the safety plan allowed, because a soldier stumbled and went down in an area where fire was being delivered, and the range safety officer could not immediately confirm that person was down because of training stress rather than an actual injury. The exercise stops, the situation gets resolved, and then, if it is safe to do so, the training resumes. The physical infrastructure required to run a major live fire exercise is itself staggering to contemplate. At the National Training Center, the target systems used during live fire exercises are sophisticated beyond what most people would expect. The targets are not just stationary plywood silhouettes sitting in the desert. Many of them are moving. They are driven by electric motors along tracks that simulate vehicle or infantry movement. They can be programmed to appear and disappear on cue, to move at varying speeds, to present different threat signatures to the soldiers engaging them. Some target systems are designed to replicate the visual appearance of specific enemy vehicles. Some are thermal targets that replicate the heat signature of vehicles and personnel, which allows crews operating thermal imaging sites in tanks and Bradleys to engage them exactly as they would engage a real threat. The range infrastructure also includes instrumentation systems that record every engagement. Sensors on the targets track when a round impacts and log the hit data in real time. Cameras positioned throughout the range record the exercise from multiple angles. Data recorders on the participating vehicles log their movements continuously throughout the exercise. All of this instrumentation feeds into an after-action review system that allows trainers to reconstruct exactly what happened during the exercise, who engaged what target at what time, where vehicles were when specific fire missions were called, what communications were made and when, and how the unit's actions compared to its stated plan. That after-action review, the AAR, is considered by many experienced trainers to be the most valuable part of the entire NTC rotation. It is where the real learning happens, because in the middle of a live fire exercise, with adrenaline and noise and dust and the thunder of weapons firing around you, it is nearly impossible to maintain a complete and accurate picture of what is actually happening. The after-action review takes all of that recorded data, all of those camera angles and sensor logs and vehicle track records, and lays it out in a format that allows everyone who participated to see exactly what they did, exactly what the consequences of their decisions were, and exactly what they need to do differently next time. The conversations that happen in those after-action reviews are famous within the military for their brutal honesty. There is a tradition at the NTC that rank largely disappears in the AAR. The trainer, often an observer-controller from the permanent NTC cadre, does not pull punches because the officer being corrected is a colonel. The mistakes get named specifically and clearly. The decisions that cost lives in the exercise, or that would have cost lives in combat, are identified and examined without softening. Colonels have stood in NTC after-action reviews and been walked through footage of their entire brigade command collapsing under pressure, and been told in plain language exactly how and why it happened. That is not a comfortable experience, but it is a necessary one, and the commanders who come back from those reviews and build that hard knowledge into their units become significantly better at their jobs. That is the entire point. But the National Training Center is only one part of the live fire training ecosystem. To understand the full scope of what the military does in this space, you need to look at the other major training centers and some of the specific exercise types that push danger levels even further. The Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Johnson, Louisiana, is the Army's other major combat training center, and it focuses primarily on light infantry and special operations forces. The terrain at Fort Johnson is completely different from the Mojave Desert at Fort Irwin. It is thick Louisiana vegetation, waterways, swamps, dense forest. It is the kind of terrain where you can lose visual contact with a soldier who is 15 feet away from you in the wrong direction. That environment creates unique challenges for live fire training, because the fundamental principle of positive identification of friendly forces before engaging becomes significantly harder to maintain. Light infantry live fire exercises at JRTC have a different character than the large combined arms fires at the NTC. They tend to be smaller in scale, faster in pace, more focused on individual and small unit skills. A squad live fire exercise might put 8 soldiers through a complex attack on an objective where they are using fire and movement, with one element laying down a base of fire while another element maneuvers, with both elements in close proximity, with live rounds going downrange the entire time. The margin for error in that kind of exercise is measured in feet. The control measures that keep it safe are fundamentally about the discipline of the individual soldiers and the absolute authority of the small unit leader to stop movement the instant something is not right. Platoon live fire exercises at JRTC add the complexity of multiple squads operating simultaneously, with indirect fire assets available to the platoon leader, with communication requirements between elements, and with the added stress of opposing forces who are actively trying to disrupt the attack. The platoon leader in that environment is managing a live fire engagement that is genuinely complex, while simultaneously trying to maintain situational awareness of every element under command, maintain communication with higher headquarters, call for and adjust fire support, account for casualties, and make tactical decisions that directly affect whether the mission succeeds or fails. Company and battalion level live fire exercises stack that complexity yet again. By the time you are running a battalion live fire exercise at JRTC, you have multiple companies maneuvering simultaneously. You have artillery and mortar fire being coordinated across a wide area. You have attack aviation potentially integrated into the scheme of maneuver, and you have the battalion command element trying to maintain a coherent picture of a battle that is happening across multiple kilometers of complex terrain. The potential for something to go wrong in that environment is not theoretical. It is constant and real, and managed through nothing less than the total professional dedication of every person involved. Beyond the training centers, the military runs live fire exercises at installations all across the country and all around the world. From Fort Bragg in North Carolina to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii to bases in Germany, South Korea, and Japan, units conduct live fire training as a routine part of maintaining combat readiness. The specific standards that must be met before a unit is certified to conduct live fire training, the training requirements for range safety officers, the documentation and approval processes for individual ranges, all of this is governed by detailed Army regulations and installation policies that create a framework for safe live fire operations regardless of location. The Navy and Marine Corps bring their own unique dimension to live fire training, and it is one that introduces challenges that Army-centric training does not face. Amphibious assault live fire training, coordinating fires from ships at sea with infantry assault forces moving across a beach and into contested terrain, is among the most complex and dangerous training evolutions in the entire U.S. military. The Marine Corps' version of the Combined Arms live fire exercise brings together naval surface fires, which are large-caliber rounds fired from destroyers and cruisers offshore, with marine air assets including fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft, with artillery firing from inland positions, with direct-fire weapons from assault amphibious vehicles in the water and on the shore, and with infantry elements moving on foot through the objective area. The coordination required to bring all of those fires together, without putting any of them through a friendly position, is breathtaking in its complexity. One of the most demanding live fire training programs in the Marine Corps is run at 29 Palms, California, at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. The Combined Arms exercise, known as CAX, is the culminating event for infantry battalions preparing for deployment, and it is specifically designed to integrate every fire support asset available to a Marine Air Ground Task Force in a live fire environment. The scale of the ordnance expended in a single CAX event is extraordinary. Artillery firing thousands of rounds, aircraft delivering live bombs and rockets, direct fire weapons engaging hundreds of targets. The ground shakes. The sky fills with the signatures of weapons functioning at their full designed capability. It is as close to the sensory reality of large-scale combat as any training event can realistically achieve. The Air Force contributes to joint live fire training through close air support exercises, where pilots practice delivering live munitions in direct support of ground forces. These exercises require an extraordinary level of coordination between the pilots and the ground forces they are supporting, mediated by a specific specialty called the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, or JTAC. The JTAC is an Air Force or Army Special Operations Specialist who is embedded with ground units and serves as the link between pilots overhead and commanders on the ground. The JTAC directs aircraft onto targets, provides attack geometry guidance to ensure rounds do not hit friendly forces, and is personally responsible for confirming that the target being engaged is what it is supposed to be and that no friendly forces are within the danger radius of the munition being employed. Live JTAC training, where a controller is actually directing real aircraft to deliver real ordnance onto real targets, is conducted at ranges specifically designed for that purpose. The Nellis Air Force Base Range Complex in Nevada is the largest instrumented air and ground test and training range in the world, covering over 2.9 million acres. Live munitions are dropped on those ranges as a matter of routine. The process is tightly controlled, but the reality is that the ordnance going downrange is live, and the potential for catastrophic error is always present in the background of every event. Special Operations Forces live fire training exists in its own category entirely, and in many ways represents the absolute cutting edge of what controlled live fire training looks like. Army Special Forces, Rangers, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, and the other units that constitute the United States Special Operations community train to standards that are difficult to fully communicate in a format like this without being accused of exaggeration. The accuracy requirements for live fire qualification in these units are genuinely elite by any standard you apply. The scenario complexity is at the far end of what it is possible to safely train. And the integration of fire within the teams themselves, where team members are shooting live rounds in close proximity to each other while moving under conditions that simulate the chaos of a real direct action operation, represents the most demanding version of this training that exists. The shoot house is one of the defining training tools of the Special Operations community. A shoot house is a specially constructed building with multiple rooms, hallways, corners, and doorways, specifically designed to allow training in close quarters battle with live ammunition. The walls of a shoot house are constructed from materials chosen specifically to contain rounds and prevent the catastrophic result of a ricochet, sending a bullet through a wall and into a person on the other side. The floors are designed to prevent rounds from deflecting upward at dangerous angles. Every aspect of the physical structure is built around the requirement that live rounds can be fired inside it without killing the people using it. The live-fire shoot-house exercises that Tier 1 Special Operations units conduct are among the most visually dramatic and genuinely dangerous training evolutions that exist outside of combat itself. Assaulters stack on a door, a breacher places explosive charges on the door frame, and at the signal the breach goes, the door is blown, and the team enters the room, engaging live targets simultaneously while maintaining muzzle awareness of their teammates at distances of sometimes less than 3 feet. The discipline required to function safely at that level of proficiency is not trained in weeks or months. It is built over years of incremental progression through increasingly complex live-fire scenarios. The progression is important to understand because it reflects the fundamental philosophy of how the military approaches live-fire training across every unit and every skill level. Nobody starts at the most complex and dangerous end of the spectrum. Every soldier, Marine, sailor, and airman begins with the basics. They qualify with their weapon on a standard range, engaging stationary paper targets at fixed distances under careful supervision. They learn the fundamentals of marksmanship and safe weapons handling until those fundamentals are truly automatic. Only after demonstrating mastery at that basic level do they progress to more complex scenarios. From individual marksmanship qualification, soldiers progress to basic reflexive fire exercises where they engage targets that appear suddenly at varying distances and angles. Then to buddy team live fire exercises where 2 soldiers work together with one providing covering fire while the other moves. Then to squad level. Then to platoon level. Each step up in complexity adds new challenges, new coordination requirements, and new opportunities for something to go wrong. And at each step, the safety framework expands to match the increased complexity. The graduation from one level to the next requires specific certification of both the individual soldiers and the leaders who are responsible for executing the exercise safely. A platoon leader cannot run a platoon live-fire exercise at the NTC without having previously led his unit through every preparatory step in the training sequence. There are documented records that must exist for each unit and each leader. The Army's training management system tracks all of this, and a unit that cannot demonstrate it has completed the required preparatory training will not be allowed onto the live-fire range at the training center. The system is designed to ensure that units arrive at the most demanding exercises with the foundational skills already established. The weapons themselves deserve attention in this discussion, because the variety and lethality of what is employed in combined arms live-fire training is something that most people, even people who have served in the military in non-combat roles, have never fully appreciated. The standard infantry rifle, whether the M4 carbine or its variants, fires a 5.56mm round that travels at roughly 3,000 feet per second. On a live-fire exercise, these rounds are real, and they are lethal, at ranges far beyond what most people realize. The danger zone behind any firing position must account for the full maximum range of the weapon, which for rifle ammunition can extend past 3,500 meters. The range design must ensure that there is nothing behind the target array within that distance that a missed or deflected round could hit. The M240 machine gun fires 7.62mm ammunition at cyclic rates that can exceed 650 rounds per minute. The tracers lighting up the night range during a machine gun live-fire exercise are striking to observe, but what they represent is a sustained stream of high-velocity projectiles that can penetrate light cover at distances exceeding 1,800 meters. The sound alone, in close proximity to an M240 firing a sustained burst, is physically disorienting in a way that dry-fire training simply cannot replicate. The M2 .50 caliber heavy machine gun, a weapon that has been in continuous military service since the 1930s and shows no signs of being replaced anytime soon, fires a round that is capable of destroying lightly armored vehicles and defeating cover that smaller calibers cannot penetrate. The crack of a .50 caliber round passing nearby is one of the most distinctive sounds in the experience of ground combat, and experiencing it in training is an irreplaceable preparation for encountering it in combat. The Bradley Fighting Vehicle's 25mm M242 Bushmaster chain gun is capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters, with armor-piercing rounds that will defeat most lightly armored threats the infantry is likely to encounter. When a Bradley fires in direct support of dismounted infantry during a combined arms live-fire exercise, the trainees are experiencing a fire-support relationship that will define close combat for the foreseeable future. The integration of that direct fire support with the movement of dismounted soldiers in a live fire environment is complex and dangerous and absolutely essential to train. The M1A2 Abrams main battle tank is perhaps the most dramatic element of any combined arms live-fire exercise at the NTC. The main gun fires a 120mm round that carries enough energy to penetrate modern tank armor at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. The overpressure wave from a tank main gun firing in close proximity to dismounted soldiers is powerful enough to cause physical discomfort and disorientation. The sound is not just loud, it is a physical force that you feel in your chest, in your teeth, and in every bone of your body. Training with that weapon firing live ammunition in proximity to other friendly forces requires precise coordination of timing and position that cannot be achieved any other way. The tank crew must know exactly where the infantry is. The infantry must know exactly where the tanks are and exactly what they are engaging. That shared understanding, in a live environment with all of the noise and dust and confusion that a real exercise generates, is built through training and training alone. Artillery is in a category by itself when it comes to live-fire training challenges. The M109 Paladin howitzer fires a 155mm round at distances that can exceed 30 kilometers. The time of flight for those rounds means that an artillery round fired in support of an infantry assault can be in the air for 30 or 40 seconds before it impacts. In that time, the friendly forces the artillery is supporting are moving. The world is changing, and the fire support coordination measures have to account for where those forces will be when the round arrives, not where they are when the mission is called. Coordinating artillery fires in direct support of maneuvering forces during a live fire exercise requires a fire support team embedded with the assault force, connected by radio to a fire support officer at the battalion level, connected to the artillery firing unit, with multiple layers of checks and authorizations that must be completed before any round leaves a tube. The system is designed to prevent any single communication failure or calculation error from resulting in rounds impacting in a friendly position. It has layers of redundancy built in, precisely because the consequences of failure are so severe. Rocket artillery adds yet another dimension. The M270 multiple launch rocket system and the M142 high mobility artillery rocket system can fire rockets to distances that exceed 70 kilometers for standard munitions and significantly farther for extended range variants. The use of these systems in live fire training exercises requires range space that is almost impossible to find without going to dedicated testing and training ranges, specifically designed to handle those distances. When HIMARS fires a live rocket in training, the range safety procedures involved are comparable in their complexity to those used for some types of weapons testing. Grenades, both fragmentation and concussion types, are also part of the live fire training curriculum that most infantry soldiers encounter relatively early in their careers. Grenade qualification courses expose soldiers to the experience of throwing a live grenade and observing the blast effect at close range from a protected position. The purpose is not theatrical. It is to eliminate the hesitation that occurs when a soldier encounters a grenade for the first time under pressure. If the first live grenade you have ever thrown is the one you need to throw through a window to clear a room with hostages in it, the hesitation that comes from never having experienced the reality of that weapon is dangerous both to you and to the people you are trying to save. Now let's talk about the human element of all of this in a deeper way, because the weapons and the ranges and the safety systems are only part of the story. The other part is what happens to the human beings who go through this training, physically and mentally. The physical demands of a major live fire exercise are genuinely punishing. Soldiers operating at the NTC during a rotation are typically working on severely reduced sleep schedules because the operational tempo of the training mirrors the operational tempo of actual combat, which does not observe convenient 8-hour workday schedules. Commanders are making decisions after 18 to 24 or even 36 hours without sleep. They are doing so in extreme desert temperatures that can exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and drop below freezing at night. They are managing vehicles that break down, radios that fail, and subordinates who are operating under the same level of sleep deprivation and environmental stress that they are. Live fire exercises conducted in that context have a danger profile that is qualitatively different from live fire exercises conducted by fresh, rested soldiers on a home station range. The judgment required to safely execute a live fire operation is exactly the kind of higher cognitive function that degrades first under sleep deprivation and physical stress. Range safety officers at the training centers are specifically trained to recognize the signs of cognitive degradation in the units they are observing, and the threshold for shutting down an exercise that is not proceeding safely is adjusted accordingly. The NTC has procedures specifically designed to address situations where a visiting unit is too degraded to safely continue a live fire exercise. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has happened. Units have had live fire events canceled or postponed because the safety assessment indicated that the cumulative effect of the rotation's operational tempo had pushed the unit to a point where the risk of serious injury or death was unacceptably high. Those decisions are not popular with the units affected. They feel like failure. But the experienced trainers who make them know that the purpose of the exercise is to train soldiers to fight, not to add casualties to the training base before the unit ever deploys. The mental dimension of live fire training is something that military researchers have studied extensively. What they have found is that the physiological stress response to live fire training, the elevated heart rate, the adrenaline release, the narrowing of attention and heightened sensory processing, is significantly closer to the stress response experienced in actual combat than any other form of training. This is one of the reasons live fire training is so valuable and so irreplaceable. It does not just teach tactical skills. It conditions the nervous system to function under conditions that approximate combat stress. The concept of stress inoculation, which is the deliberate repeated exposure to controlled high-stress events to build a more effective stress response over time, is at the core of why the military invests so heavily in live fire training, despite its costs and risks. A soldier who has experienced hundreds of live fire training events over a career has a nervous system that is meaningfully different from one that has not. The veteran's stress response activates faster, peaks at a more controlled level, and returns to baseline more quickly after the event. That difference is directly reflected in performance under fire. And performance under fire is the thing that determines whether people live or die. The institutional memory of what can go wrong in live fire training is held by the military in a detailed and sobering body of accident records that shapes every safety procedure and every training regulation that governs these events. The Army and Marine Corps maintain comprehensive databases of training accidents, including live fire events, that go back decades. The specific failures that led to each accident are documented, analyzed, and translated into the procedural changes that represent the military's ongoing effort to eliminate preventable causes of training injury and death. Reading through the history of live fire training accidents is a genuine education in the ways that complex, high-risk systems can fail. Sometimes the failure is in the planning. A coordination measure was drawn in the wrong place, or the wrong grid coordinate was entered into a fire support computer, or a unit's actual position was not accurately reflected in the headquarters tactical picture when a fire mission was approved. Sometimes the failure is in execution. A unit moved faster than expected and crossed a phase line before the supporting fires had shifted. A vehicle operator made a navigation error and drove into a sector where live fire was ongoing. A leader misidentified a target and engaged a friendly position. Sometimes the failure is in the physical environment itself. A round deflects off rocky terrain in a way that the range design did not anticipate. A vehicle breaks down in a location that puts it in the beaten zone of a weapons system that is about to fire. Every one of those categories of failure has been addressed in the current training regulations and safety procedures. Every procedure that seems unnecessarily complex or bureaucratic to the young soldier who has to follow it exists because someone studied a specific accident and identified a specific gap that the procedure was designed to close. The institutional knowledge embedded in those procedures represents a genuine legacy of hard experience bought at real cost, and the military takes that seriously in a way that directly influences how seriously the live fire training enterprise takes safety. None of which changes the fundamental reality that this training remains genuinely dangerous and will continue to be so. The danger cannot be trained out of live fire exercises without eliminating the thing that makes them valuable. The whole point is the presence of real weapons with real lethality, operating in a real environment. The goal is not to eliminate danger. The goal is to manage it with enough precision that the training value is captured without unnecessary loss of life, while accepting that some residual risk will always exist, and that the alternative to accepting that risk is sending less prepared soldiers into real combat, where the risk is dramatically higher and the lethality far less constrained. The officers and non-commissioned officers who run live fire training at every level of the military understand this equation with a clarity that comes from experience. The range safety officer, who has personally shut down 3 live fire exercises because something was not right, understands it. The battalion commander, who has stood in front of families to explain a training accident, understands it. The sergeant major, who has supervised hundreds of live fire events and can read the safety state of a range like a pilot reads a weather pattern, understands it. The collective expertise of these individuals is among the most valuable institutional assets the military possesses. The soldiers who go through the training understand it in a different but equally real way. The infantryman who has been through a full NTC rotation, including every live-fire event in the training sequence, arrives in a combat theater with a confidence in his own skills and his unit's capabilities that is grounded in real experience. He has been under fire. He has maneuvered under fire. He has called for fire support and felt the ground shake when it arrived. He has operated in conditions designed to push him past what he believed his limits were, and discovered that his actual limits are farther away than he thought. That knowledge is not theoretical. It is in his body. It is in his reactions. It is in every instinct he will rely on the first time the real thing happens. The transition from training to combat has always been one of the most psychologically and physically demanding experiences a human being can go through. The military has known this for as long as organized warfare has existed. The question of how to prepare soldiers as completely as possible for that transition, without actually killing them in the preparation, is one that military institutions have been wrestling with for centuries. Live fire training represents the most sophisticated answer to that question that human beings have yet developed. It is imperfect, it is dangerous, it costs money and time, and occasionally lives. But the evidence accumulated across decades of data comparing the performance of trained and undertrained units in combat is unambiguous. Units that train hard, that train realistically, that have been through the crucible of live fire exercises at places like the National Training Center and JRTC and 29 Palms, perform better when the real thing comes. They survive at higher rates. They accomplish their missions at higher rates. They protect each other better. The value of that outcome, measured against the cost of achieving it, is the calculation that military leaders have made and continue to make every time a range safety officer steps onto a range, every time a range goes hot, every time a soldier fires a live round in training and comes through it ready to face something far worse. There is a phrase that is used in military training environments so frequently that it has become almost a cliché. But like many clichés, it contains a real and hard-won truth. Train hard. Fight easy. Nobody believes the fight is ever truly easy. The people who have been in combat know exactly how hollow that formulation can sound in retrospect. But the underlying principle is real. The harder and more realistically you train before the fight, the better prepared you are when the fight arrives. And live fire training, at its most demanding and most dangerous, is the military's most powerful expression of that principle. The men and women who run these exercises, who plan them and rehearse them, and safety check them, and execute them, and shut them down when something is not right, and pick them back up and execute them again, are doing some of the most consequential professional work in the country. Their audience is not the general public. Their audience is every soldier who will one day step onto a real battlefield and need to know that the training they received was as close to the real thing as human beings could make it. The sound of a range going hot, the thunder of combined arms firing in a coordinated attack on a training objective, the flash of tracers cutting across a desert night, the concussive wave of artillery impacting in a distant target array, these things are not entertainment. They are preparation. They are the military's most serious and most demanding answer to the question of how you keep people alive in combat. And the people who hear that sound and step forward into it, in training as in combat, are something worth knowing about and worth understanding and worth respecting.